This is Devin, and once again, we are doing Writing Daily because I made this terrible deal with myself that I was going to do a podcast every single day, and that's whether you are somebody who is working on a letter to your grandmother or you're finishing your novel. We cover all aspects of writing, from down to line edits to marketing yourself. Whatever it is, we're writing daily, so we're talking about great stuff that deals with writing. And ironically, I don't know if it's ironic, about 10 days ago, I was sitting in my publisher's office. We were talking about books because that's what publishers and writers do. And he brought up this particular book, Collision Theory by Adrian Todd Zuniga. And so anyway, I ended up starting to reading the book. I'm sadly not the way through it. I'm about 75 pages in. And I did a podcast about bad first paragraphs. And as the counterweight to that, I talked about a good first paragraph. And what I enjoyed about it, it got right to the action, something that was already compelling, something that the reader was going to care about right from the get-go. And what I said at the moment was, wow, I should reach out to this guy and see if he'd be willing to do a podcast. And so today I have Adrian Todd Zuniga with me, the writer of Collision Theory, which is crazy fun. I think it's a small world. I reached out to him. We had a lot of people in common. Obviously, we're both writers, and it is a small world. Welcome.
Thanks.
Adrian.
Thanks for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad. So all right. So as we were talking right before this, we were talking about obviously your book. Your book is just about to be published officially. I obviously got an advance copy. I'm lucky that way. So can you give us sort of like a very brief summary without giving too much away about the book?
Not well, I'll say that. It's a book I worked on for 13 years, so it's an interesting thing to try to elevator pitch it. But I just sort of talk about the first chapter generally, which that helps me launch more comfortably and talking about it more broadly. But in the first chapter, a man, and it's only a 2-page first chapter, so everybody, it's not a huge spoiler, but a man goes up to the roof of his building, sort of to take a breath, take a moment, and he sees a woman in the distance on his same roof who's about to jump and kill herself. And his reaction is to try to save her, and so he invites her to dinner and then invites her to travel around the world, and then finally she jumps. And so that kicks off sort of this book in which this guy next is a year and a half later, and he's trying to sort of cope with what's happened, and he's struggling through a series of different things. His mother's calling and asking him to come home because she really needs him to come home. And so it's a series of events. I guess why I'm not good at talking about it at this point of the interview is that I didn't realize I was writing a mystery, and I would have never thought of myself as doing that. But I think it's sort of, there are these layers, and there's these mistaken identities, and there's these things that sort of add up to this book slowly unraveling and revealing a mystery. So I guess I can say that at one point he pitches a movie about Elvis's Graceland being kidnapped by aliens. So there's it had, like, I try to make it fun, and it's interesting your response to the opening paragraph, because I guess for me as a writer, I'm big on narrative speed. I'm trying to get people through and like race through, and how that sort of plays out is a lot of dialogue and just a great fear that somebody will get bored. So I'm always trying to just throw people as fast into the action as possible. I'm definitely not an action writer, but yeah, so that's been something that's been important to me. And yeah, that's a long, winding answer.
No, I actually thought it was a fairly concise summary of what a reader can expect. Okay, so obviously you just mentioned 13 years to write it. It took me to write my memoir probably about 7 years, and that's before any human beings actually saw it. 13 years, long time. So obviously we're both on the slow boat to China program.
Right.
What, first off, what was, if you don't mind me asking, what was the inspiration behind the book, and what kind of things did you come along the way? Are you just a particularly slow writer? What was part of the experience of writing it over such a long time?
Yeah, the first thing, it was interesting. I did a show in San Francisco, a literary deathmatch. I host those all over the world, and I did a show, and one of the girls who had come, women, I guess, I don't know, had sat in the front row, and I realized that she had been with me the day that I had conceived of the book, and we had gone to see a panel with William Gibson and Chuck Palahniuk, and a screenwriter who I don't know who that is. He's probably wildly famous as well, and I just remember Chuck Palahniuk saying something that I was like, oh, that's what I have to do. I have to take these 5 short story ideas. I have to take these 3 novel ideas. Instead of, eventually getting to them, I have to smash them all together and put them in a book. And I have to write that novel to like just have an endless amount of things going on and to keep it really moving. And so I can't remember what he said. The other thing he said that I do remember was he said, if writing isn't the most fun thing you're doing, do something else. The only reason I write is because no one will pay me to jack off. So somehow that stuck in my head. And I was like, okay, that's funny. It's somewhat useful. Like, yeah, I mean, you should only be writing if you really want to. But yeah, so that was the first thing. And then there's another huge element to this, which is there's a book called Flash Fiction. It has a green cover. I think it's like 80 short stories. And that book has been really important in my writing, just in terms of the power of what somebody can do in 2 to 3 page stories. And one of the stories in there was a story by Mark Strand called Space. And it basically is about a guy. It's a little bit different conditions. It's about a guy who goes up to a rooftop to sunbathe. He sees the woman who's about to kill herself. And then he's a bit slimier, and he's kind of like, oh yeah, like she's pretty hot and she looks a certain way. It's very male gaze oriented. And then the last part of that story is there's space between her and the ledge, which I think implies that she jumps, but it's quite, I don't know, that story I had read in maybe 1997, 1998, and it just stuck with me. And I actually, a couple of years before he died, I met him, I guess it was in Brattleboro, Vermont, or maybe it was at the Edith Wharton house. Anyway, I'd gone to an event and he had read from his new collection of prose poems. It was extraordinary. And afterwards I talked to him and I said, by the way, I didn't directly steal, but I kind of lifted the idea of your short story for the first chapter of my novel. And he's like, oh, as long as it's better, that's fine. I was like, I don't know if it's better, but he was just kind of like, yeah, you have my blessing. I was like, oh, that's good. And I'm sad because I wanted to send him the novel, but he passed. But yeah, so that was a huge element for me. And for me, I always feel like my goal as a writer has been to be part of the conversation, that I think there's a lineage of either short stories or novels that you can sort of see them go through time. You're like, oh, this guy influenced this guy, or this woman influences this guy, and this one, and so to me, I felt like I was inserting myself in the conversation because I was both speaking directly to a story, but also like putting my take on the rest of it and making it, instead of a 2 or 3 page story, a 204 page novel.
So in terms of the writing, matter of fact, I want to say this, that I because I tend to do this, I go to the back of the book to look for the acknowledgments. Your editor was Seth Fisher.
Yep.
Who is somebody that we have in common. I actually went to school with Seth and has been at one time or another part of my writers group. I consider him a wildly talented guy. And I'm crossing my fingers that you think he is a wonderful person.
It's amazing. Yeah.
He's a great guy. What was it like to take sort of your this is my interpretation, take your baby and hand it over to an editor, and I'm sure at some point it's like, okay, now we're going to have a conversation.
Yeah. It was, I'd never worked directly with an editor. I've had tons of writing friends through my life that have read my work and have encouraged me in different ways or suggested different things. But I'd never been in a position where somebody was, I guess paid, but somebody was invested to the level that Seth was. And I thought, it's interesting. His first response to the book, he had sent me this huge, I would say a letter that was like 2, 4, 6 pages long, but it was quite lengthy, and it was talking about dramatic irony, and he was talking about, all this stuff, and that me as a writer, I was just like, he's like, I don't mean to be condescending or talk about stuff, but I was just like, no, this is awesome. Like you're laying out an argument by which you're then going to have a series of notes. And it was just great because I was just like, oh, I'm in the hands of someone who definitely knows what he's talking about, but also the care that he had with his notes. I'm very open. I guess my greatest fear for any of my writing is that, I see editors and publishers and everybody as a gatekeeper, like, because the worst thing that could happen is you let something out into the world and it's actually not good, and then people go, eh. And so working with Seth was incredible because he was relentless. He really pushed me in a lot of amazing ways, and just the thoroughness. And I think he responded well to my openness to changes. I'm like very open. I think I understand I understand what excellence is, but I don't always know how to get there. So it was really amazing to watch him slowly build a bridge and for us to come together on these things. And I had probably done 13 full-on edits of the book by the time he got it, and we did 2 together. And I would say that, like, I felt like I got it in retrospect probably to like a 70 or 75% mark without him. And I feel like that last 25% was really his doing, and just, it was amazing. And I was going to say something else that was clever, but I just forgot it. So I'll just pass on that.
So
I remember. Actually, sorry. I was just doing an interview in Austin, and my friend, I'd read the first chapter of my book, and he was like, wow, that was really gripping in first person and all this. He's like, why did you decide to do it in first person? Like, that's a great choice. And I was like, oh, there were 3 chapters in my novel that were third person, and second person. And basically I was like, there's no way these are ever going to change. And the first chapter was in third person until I think the final edit. And Seth was just like, it's got to be first person. And I was like, yeah, it really does. So, and then that of course caused a couple other problems, and I had to fix other things. But yeah, it was great. And now people are responding to it, and I think the first person of it does make it more present and relevant. So, yeah.
Well, what do you think after all this time? I mean, obviously I think we're just days away from its official release, correct?
Yep, 6 days.
6 days. Well, many blessings to the future. What do you think is sort of like the hardest part of writing and completing? This is your debut novel, correct?
It is, yeah.
So what do you think might have been the hardest part of this whole process for you?
I think the hardest part is, I think for me, in retrospect, I wouldn't have said this is the hardest part along the way, but now I'm coming to understand I never was a plot guy. Actually, I'll say this, I'll bury myself here, but I think, and I've seen this with a couple other of my friends, and I think me getting through this is helping them get through it. But I think I used to just sit down and type, and that my genius was going to do the rest, and it was going to take over. And that's why this book took 13 and then 15 edits total to get published. And that's why it took me 13 years to get it to that place, because I think a lot of times I wasn't just saying like, take yourself, your ego, et cetera, out of it. And just, I don't think it was an ego-based thing. I think it was just like, take this need to be perceived as genius out of it, and really look at what you have and how do you push this forward, and how do you make it the best possible story, as if it's somebody else's almost. And I think I kept, I would start editing it, and then I would just sort of get into the swim of language, and then I'd be like, oh, now this locks in for me, and then I'd sort of drift through it and feel really good about the language. But again, there were elements that were just not lining up, and I think early on I'm not certain I felt this way, but I'm somewhat confident that I thought like, oh, there are mistakes here and there, but no one will notice them, which is totally ridiculous. And so by pushing through and just I just kept hammering at it. And I would let it rest for months or even years at a time, and then I would come back to it because I realized it was a story that mattered to me, and I felt like it was close. I always felt it was close enough to go back to, and it was always farther away than I wanted it. But in the end, I guess we got it all the way.
So is there a sort of like a number one takeaway that you have in terms of either being a writer or as a person, that this is how somehow changed you for the better, this process?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm a big preacher of patience, because I just think I think we as Americans, especially, you're American, yes?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. So as Americans, we want it. We're told we're the best country in the world. We're brilliant, et cetera, et cetera. Like, we're just, okay, now it's my turn. And I think the reality of that is, like, however long it takes you to create something is how long it takes you to create something. And you're going to be impatient, and you're going to be frustrated, and you're going to want to give up, or you're going to think it's the greatest thing ever. But the reality is like, care about the work, nurture the work, and just be patient. And it took me 13 years, and looking back, this book should have taken 3 years. Like, that's how I feel about it now, but it didn't. It took me 13 and maybe the next book will take 3, probably more than that, but we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I think we get caught up in all these cycles. My friend is getting published. This is happening. Like, I need to pay rent or whatever. But the idea of just being patient and being connected to the work and really trying to do something excellent, it can take a long time. And you as a person might need to grow up beyond your talent, you know. And I know I've grown up a lot in the last 13 years. I would hope so. But yeah.
That's really incredibly insightful stuff. You mentioned a next book or a possibility. Is that something that you're currently working on? Do you have anything sort of like any irons in the fire, so to speak?
Yeah, we've just finished a movie. Me and my best friend, I finished a film about a hockey player from the 90s who was really a superstar hockey player named Theo Fleury, and then he was raped by his hockey coach 150 times when he was 15. So it's a Me Too story about him, and so we're looking to get that funded. And then and I'm also working on another novel, which is the premise is that in a world without heroes, any act of heroism is an act of superheroism. And that came just from me realizing that I go to all the Avengers movies, I go to the Marvel movies, but there's something in leaving that theater that must take me off the hook for being responsible politically. And so this book is called Superhero, and it's about 3 people that just stand up in the world and kind of do the right thing. And by that become sort of thought of as superheroes in the culture, which is, but they have no superpower. So I was interested in taking that on, and that deals with racism and sexism and altruism. And I think it's, yeah, I'm through 3/5 of the way through it. Line something, by the way, going back to the other question, outline is something I would suggest for everybody. I never would have thought that was a thing. Once I started doing film projects and TV stuff, it's like, oh, you have to know where you're going. And that's the biggest time saver ever. I used to think that like, my genius will get me there and I'll come up with a great idea. But now I realize that idea of that genius is really me being lazy or drifting and just being like, oh, I don't want to do the work today. I'll just type. And outline has helped me get like, oh no, like, steer back on, like, you're bored, you're tired, you're frustrated, you're hungry, but whatever, like, keep going on this path. It's the one you thought about for weeks instead of the one that you're just kind of like, oh, I don't want to. So, yeah.
So we might have had a short audio glitch there. Could you say that? Because this was, can you say that again in terms of the outline? If I understood that correctly, that's sort of like one of your big tips for writing.
Yeah. I'll say that again. The idea of an outline is essential. And for me, what I realized is a lot of times when I'm writing, and even with like having this outline, that there are times when I'm tired or hungry or bored and I just don't want to be sitting down and typing this book. And so that's when what I refer to as my genius, destructive, will just sort of drift me off into another land. And I recognize this from writing other things, that like, that's really destructive to the end product. I know that's how I wrote Collision Theory when it was in its infancy. And so now I'm just being more rigid about staying on an outline, and the outline is very general. Like, it says like, these 4 things have to happen in this chapter. So it gives me freedom. And I think there's something in us as writers where we're like, oh, I don't want an outline, it's restrictive. But I think in the long term, it's going to save you about 7 to 9 years.
That's not a bad save.
Right.
So, in terms of your writing life, when you are sort of like in the thick of it, when you were sort of like on deadlines and in working on collision theory, what does your day look like as a writer?
Yeah, those days where it's like that are my favorite days. Those are too rare because life gets in the way. I'm touring for Literary Deathmatch, or I've got a show that night, or I've got somebody dropped out or whatever, or those kind of things always frazzle my days. But when I was just working on collision theory and getting that edit done, sort of how I do it is I wake up, I shower, I put on my backpack, and I go to a cafe somewhere. I've been living in London, so that's pretty much the plan. And then I do a 2-hour session, and then I walk to another cafe, or I have lunch, and then I do another hour and a half. And then after that, I'll go home, check email and whatever, and catch up. And then I hopefully can get like another 3-hour session in. But that's, again, there's a lot of the other stuff that comes into play. But when I'm able to do that, that's really great. And I noticed that if I start working on uncreative stuff early in the day, it's the best thing because I get it done, but it also makes it really hard to answer email. Like it's really like pulling hair to be like, I have to think about this thing that ultimately feels meaningless to me versus this thing that I know I'm building something that is lasting and in my mind wonderful. So that's the challenge for me. And if I start the day by just being like, okay, I have to do the work stuff first, and then I'll get to the creative stuff, that to me, that's impossible because it's just so easy to just check your email another time or whatever. So I definitely am a big encourager of just get the day started with work. Try to see a movie. That's another thing. Jason Reynolds, who's a great writer, I just saw him do a talk in San Antonio. He's like, I work from 7 to 2 and I go see a movie every day. If I'm not on the road, that's what I do every single day. I was like, yeah, I've been there. It's nice to get away from that stuff.
Yeah, no, I think you said it well. I mean, to be quite honest with you, I tend to look at it as that I want to read every day.
Yeah.
Because I'm sort of a book obsessive compulsive, so I'm constantly reading. I might be reading 5 or 10 books at the same time, and it just like it doesn't matter if it's a how-to book or if it's fiction or a memoir. I think what I want personally is that I want to feel as though I'm constantly being inspired by somebody else's process, somebody else's work.
Yeah.
Do you have any favorite authors?
Yeah. I would say George Saunders, Edgar Carrot, Marilyn Robinson. I like Amy Bender. I like people who are a little bit, the French word is décalé. It means it's like they're a little bit off. So there's always something a little strange about what they're doing. So yeah, those are some of my go-tos.
Yeah, no, you just mentioned a couple winners. I'm a big George Saunders fan as well, and I think off is probably a reasonable explanation. You mentioned I think you called it Celebrity Deathmatch, and by the way, I did you a complete disservice, and I apologize. Normally, I ask for a bio. I didn't today. I just got it in from you. Gratefully. I think we'll read it at the end, but you did mention Literary Deathmatch. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? Because it sounds like it's very cool.
Yeah. So it's it's a live show. We bring 4 authors together to read their own work for 7 minutes or less. And then we have 3 to 4 all-star judges, actors, comedians, writers, ballerinas, chefs. It's a total mix of fun, interesting people. Each of the readers reads, and then the judges comment on their work in a very sweet, loving way. We have a no meanness rule. So we're anti-cynicism. And then the judges pick 2 finalists to go to the finals, and then those 2 compete for the Literary Deathmatch crown. And so we play games like Pin the Mustache on Hemingway, or we have complicated author name spelling bees. So it's all very fun. I host it. I do basically literary stand-up to open the show. So I have a huge, ridiculous wealth of knowledge about author facts that I've sort of either automatically funny or I try to spin into jokes and whatnot. Like here's one. Lord Byron used to call William Wordsworth William Turdsworth. I mean, it's like so infantile, which Lord Byron was very infantile. And like, but it's just funny. And you realize like, oh yeah, everybody's an idiot through every generation, including the writer types. So.
Yeah, no, I don't think that we have cornered the market on idiocy. So well said there. So is there any last tips or things that we need to know about collision theory? Or, well, truthfully, after I read your bio, I'm gonna want to know how we can get in touch with you or track you down, or at the very least buy your book. But do you have any sort of like final thoughts on writing or how you do it, or whatever's striking your fancy today?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my one message beyond the patience is just be compassionate. You're going to have days where you're great. And those days, sometimes you look back at what you wrote and you go, it wasn't that great. But if you feel good, go with that. But I think, you're also going to have days where you're having a crummy day and you end up typing and you go, oh, wow, I really got to something. But I think just go at it as hard as you can for as long as you can. If you have appointments, if you have arguments with your significant others, whatever, like let that exist too. But just try to keep going and be compassionate with the work. Don't get too frustrated. And, that leads into the patience, because it could take a while, but it's going to be worth it. I mean, it's at the end of the days, like you're going to have created something that only you can create, which is pretty outstanding. Like that's an amazing thing. And if it takes you 50 years, there's going to be a point where you finish something that is unique to you. And I think that's a pretty outstanding thing about writing.
Yeah, I would agree. I would probably frame it as it's not personal. Like, in other words, if I have a good writing day, I try not to build myself up into the next, Salman Rushdie.
Right.
And if I have a terrible day, I don't have to be the lowliest worm who's ever trod on the face of the earth.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's why when you write when you work on a piece as you did over 13 years, that it just needs to take whatever amount of time that it needs to take until you're like, that is the final period, we're good to go, and now I'm going to release this baby to the universe, to allow people like Seth Fisher to kind of start analyzing it and make some changes to improve it. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's a wild ride, but you're literally creating nothing something from absolutely nothing, from like a speck of ether in your brain, like just like a little space. And you're like, oh, I'm going to run down that path. It is, I think it's George R.R. Martin who said the process of writing is not that different from the process of being psychotic. I don't know why I said psychotic, being psychotic process, but that's fine. But the thing maintains, it's like, you got to be a little crazy to try this. And so we open up this crazy part of ourselves. And I don't know, I think it's really honorable. And I think it feels like everybody writes these days because blogs have made that known or things like that. But that's fine. Like, you're still going to create something that no one else has or can. So
I think it's a remarkable process. I think I'm just going to keep doing it. It's one of those things that you could just keep doing it until they put you into the ground or something.
Right.
So I want to, let's see. So Adrian Todd Zuniga is the host and creator of Literary Deathmatch, now featured in over 60 cities worldwide. Wow, that is actually quite amazing. He hosts LDM Book Report on YouTube and is the co-writer of Madden NFL 18's interactive movie Longshot, AE Sports, which earned a nomination for a Writers Guild of America Award in 2018. An award-winning journalist, he now focuses on fiction and screenwriting. He lives between London and Los Angeles. So totally, you kick ass. And
Thanks. I'm trying.
My pleasure. We have to go after it, right?
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic. So if people want to track you down, they want to find your book, is there a good way to do that?
There is. Yeah, you can. I always encourage people to buy the book from indiebound.org. My argument is that on Amazon, you're just a number, and then your book sale is a number, and they don't care. But if you buy from IndieBound, independent publishers, I'm sorry, independent bookstores are going to be fulfilling that order, and the people there are literally going to be handling the book, or they're going to know that the book is bought. So that brings attention to it, and then they say, oh, well, you know, let's put this at the front of the store. Let's give this a little attention, or let's invite this author in. So it's, I think you know, I've been learning a lot about this. I've dealt with the book world for a long time, but now it's like, it's me and the cannon. I don't know how to say that. Me and the barrel. I don't know, whatever. But so I'm learning like how people actually negotiate the book world, and Amazon's fine too. It's on there. Only 13 until it sells out on Amazon, which I'm very excited about. I think they give them 17, but yeah, so you can do that. You can find me on Twitter at @Zuniga, Zuniga, or Literary Deathmatch is a site. I just launched AdrianToddZuniga.com. It's got some wrinkles in there to be worked out, but yeah, I'm all over the place. Just type my name into Google and you'll find a way to yell at me.
I think that is fantastic. Again, once again, we're talking about collision theory, the writer Adrian Todd Zuniga. This has been really a fun interview. Thank you so much for, and I guess it will show you what you can do when you're just like, hey, I will take this book. I will read this book. I will reach out to the author and I will ask them to be on my podcast. And here we are. I thank you so much for your time. For everybody else, please check out Adrian's work. It is going to be available, I think, everywhere in about 6 days.
Yep.
Hit the like button on Facebook. Follow me on Twitter and YouTube and all that kind of fun stuff. I'm also at devingallaudet.com, and my memoir is coming out in September 18th, 10,000 Miles, with my dead father's ashes. Adrian, thank you so much again for your time and your energy this morning, and I wish you crazy, crazy success.
Yeah, same to you. Thanks so much, Devin.
All right, terrific. Have a great day.
All right, take care.